Yeah, I got a million of them. Some of them are pretty funny.
I saw the Easter thing on, the Easter bunny.
Yes.
All right, looks like we are live. Are we live?
I'm the last one to know.
I'm the last one to know too, it seems.
Yeah, it says we're streaming live on YouTube.
All right, well, we're just going to assume we are live.
Yeah. On YouTube, live. That's it.
All right, well, good evening, everybody, or good day, wherever you are. This is Aeon Byte Live, episode 13. As always, happy heresies, and heresy shouldn't be this much fun, and whatever taglines I'm using. So welcome, everybody. I'm sure everybody's piling into the comment section. As always, if you have questions, Vance and I will try to prune some questions for you for our guests. Again, if you do the super chat where you donate money, I'm assuming, you will be put on top of the queue as long as it's not anything too offensive or really offensive. But I think our guests have very thick skin either way, but let's not be offensive. Keep that for the comment sections and the fights in the comment section. So anyway, it's great to have you on. Tonight we have, again, wonderful guests and also friends, so it's even better. We've got Joanna Kujawa streaming all the way from Australia on a beautiful morning, I hope. How are you doing, Joanna?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, the pleasure's all ours. And again, it's great to have you on, and it's great to have you on for the first time on Aeon Byte Live, and I am sure it won't be the last time, not if I have my way. And we've also got the wonderful Laurence Galian. Thanks for being here, Laurence. How are you?
I'm doing great, and it's a great pleasure to be on the show. Thanks for inviting me, Miguel, and I'm very happy to be here talking with Joanna.
What a gentleman.
He's opening so many doors for you as we invite the divine feminine with us. Awesome. And last but not least, as always, we've got the MoonDog. Holy guacamole, Vance. How are you?
Holy guacamole. I'm doing good. Got Laurence here, so I don't have to worry about looking for his questions tonight, because he can ask them himself. Right, Laurence?
Wonderful, wonderful. And I see the chat room is starting to fill up, so good. So let's have some fun. I guess I wanted to start with something interesting before I ask a question for Joanna. And I talked to this with Chris Knowles this morning because I felt I had an experience and I felt I needed testimony. I needed to lay down what had happened in case something happened. But I was walking the dogs this morning through the trails. As many of you know, I live here in the countryside of Illinois. And as I'm walking to the trail, suddenly the dogs are barking and going crazy. And there's an owl, maybe 6 feet away, 7 feet away. And this owl is just sitting there, sort of hopping around, staring, and it won't fly away. And I turned around, went back, and then I grabbed the other dog. I came back and the owl was there just staring at me. So of course I was a little freaked out. Well, it's the first time I'd ever seen an owl, but as far as omens go, as many of you probably know, owls have two significance, or two possibilities, if you would. One is death in some form or another, and of course the other is wisdom. I guess if you're Gnostic, it could be the wisdom of death, the Akamoth that the Gospel of Philip and other groups talk about. So I took it a little strangely. I talked to Chris, and he was telling me he's also been having owl visitations, and he sees it as something not as positive. So I'm trying to think this is Minerva or Athena calling upon.
Correct. Yeah.
So I thought. So I thought I would start with that. Maybe if you guys want to talk about owls or what omens you have or whatever you want to talk about. But Joanna, now that
night or day? Was it night or day?
It was
the owl of daylight.
Yes, Philip did. It was. Yes, I didn't think about that. Yes, why was there an owl in the middle of a trail during the daylight? So
all right, answer. There's your answer.
There you go. So we'll take it as a good omen. So anyway, Joanna, now that I've set the Athena path with you, For the listeners or the audience or the seers, because it's YouTube Live, tell us, you've had a great journey. I mean, your journey is taking your journey in search of the divine feminine, and your big self, your big S self, has taken you across the world. So maybe briefly tell us, how did you become interested in the divine feminine in your life? I mean, you were raised traditional Catholic, right? Virgin Mary and all that
all of it.
old stuff.
So thank you for asking this question, because it's a fantastic question. But also, perhaps before I answer, perhaps I can say what I am not, because one of your guests did that, and it's a very good academic practice. So I'm not a biblical scholar, so we get it of way. I'm not a biblical scholar, although I'm an academic, and I still work as an academic and publish as an academic. My training is really in theoretical philosophy and in medieval philosophy. So not a biblical scholar. So now that we know what I'm not, wow, my journey with the divine feminine. So well, I don't know where to start. So perhaps I'll start with being Catholic, being born in Poland and being Catholic. So obviously we had Virgin Mary and all, as you said. However, there were some shortcomings to Virgin Mary that I didn't understand at the time. But now I started to think about her. I'll just interrupt myself, because Carl Jung was so happy, that Catholics have Virgin Mary, so there is some divine feminine, but I'm a woman and I was not so thrilled, because I think that what happened actually with Virgin Mary, it is that they provided us with this kind of figure of consolation, but a figure that nevertheless doesn't liberate us from this societal matrix. Gnostically speaking. So yes, we have someone to cry on her lap, but she really doesn't liberate us. This is how I see. So it is basically, with this harsh God, you have also this feminine figure, like a mother figure. But really, I believe, like the Gnostics and and Hinduism, because I'll get into this, that we really need to liberate ourselves. It's about gnosis of liberation. It is not about, going to mama and crying on her lap. Right, so that's part of it. But my first encounter with funny that we're talking about the owl with the divine feminine, it was actually not through religion, but as a little girl, I didn't read fairy tales, but my mother gave me Greek myths. So obviously, I loved them, and I immediately started to wonder which goddess I am. I didn't understand the term archetype, right? Because they're fantastic archetypes, but I couldn't decide, because on the one hand, I wanted to be Athena, because I always loved knowledge even then. On the other hand, I thought she was a little bit, well, a little bit not feminine, let's put it this way, very wise, but she doesn't even look as a woman. She's a very masculine figure. We just know she's a woman. And then, I thought it would be nice to have some adventures like Artemis or Diana. I wasn't particularly outdoorsy, but, I love traveling, so I thought it could be cool to be her. And then, of course, Aphrodite, because, I thought it would be nice to have a boyfriend, and fall in love. So Aphrodite, so I was trying to put them together into one archetype, but it wasn't working like that. And it's quite interesting, because later in life, I discovered that this Western archetype of Athena, is actually correct in Western society, because it is very difficult to succeed in academia unless you are very masculine, even in a like a man in a dress. So I observed it. I didn't have a problem really, but I observed some female colleagues at the Pontifical Institute who were, a little bit more feminine or flirtatious, and they actually had to completely change their personality to succeed in academia. So they couldn't be like these charming women that were also intelligent. They just had to be intelligent. And especially I remember one case that this woman went to the Vatican to learn advanced Latin, because we had access to the Vatican library. I wish I had the access now, with all of these conspiracy theories, but then I didn't know better. I just wanted to be a good student, right? And she came back completely different. She came back as Athena, focused on her studies, but basically lost all her charm, right? So this is just a kind of a side notice. And then some confusion that comes with this. You can interrupt me at any moment. Then I became enamored with Odysseus. Odyssey is my favorite work ever. And I thought, I want to be like Odysseus. But then I decided, but he sleeps with all of his women. I don't want to sleep with women. So it would cause, complete confusion. So I thought, what if I am like Odysseus, but I'm not a man? And it didn't work because, I was just only like 8. So then I thought I would be a nymph because, they lived on a Greek island, right? So it would be cool to live on a Greek island and do whatever you want. And then I was taught that you cannot be a nymph because, basically the word nymphomaniac comes from this. And I couldn't understand why these very independent women, were called, nymphomaniacs, basically. So what I'm saying that when you're a woman, there are these limitations, right? So once you go any closer to some kind of charm, feminine charm, it is basically kind of has a negative connotation. So do you want me to move on to Indian goddesses? Because
Yes,
there is an equivalent before we go like maybe deeply into like esoterica. When I got interested in Hinduism, because after Pontifical Institute, I just basically started to travel to Asia. First, I wanted to be a Buddhist, but then I actually became esoteric Hindu. I had a kind of light look at the Indian Hindu goddesses, and there I found, it's my favorite, I found Saraswati. Oh, you see, Saraswati, who is a goddess of wisdom. So goddess of wisdom, but she didn't lose her feminine touch. She is basically very feminine, very learned. So it was a very, very nice example because she's definitely very feminine in a kind of poised way, but she's a goddess of wisdom, she's a goddess of learning, she's a goddess of writing, she's a goddess of speech, right? She's God's wisdom, basically. So then I noticed that other goddesses in Hinduism actually are perhaps even prototypes for Greek goddesses, because when let's look at Artemis, the goddess of outdoors and hunt. So there's a Durga in Hinduism, she rides a lion or a tiger usually, but she's a very much a powerful goddess, very independent goddess. And then for Aphrodite, there are several goddesses. One is, for example, Radha, which is kind of romantic love, but she's really longing for Krishna all the time. And one is Sundari or Tripura Sundari, which is super powerful goddess. And she's like full-on sexual goddess, except that unlike Aphrodite, she doesn't lose her power. When Aphrodite is basically, a little bit like Marilyn Monroe, gorgeous, but, always in trouble, right? So when Sundari is never in trouble. And what I also noticed that not only the goddesses are very similar between Hinduism and Greek mythology, but in Greek mythology, they are kind of, all gods act a little bit like irresponsible teenagers, right? I mean, like, who could treat them seriously? I mean, Zeus, like, dad, behave yourself, right? When in Hinduism, they also had this kind of spiritual aspect to them. So if it's goddess of wisdom, it's not only goddess of knowledge, it's goddess of liberation through wisdom. If, for example, if you're Radha, you're not just, have affairs or you long after somebody like Aphrodite, but you gain liberation through devotion and love, right? Mm-hmm. So this was much more interesting because these goddesses had this spiritual aspect to them that actually are aimed at liberation. And this is what really got me interested in later esoteric Hinduism.
Joanna, may I interrupt you a moment, please? I have noticed that in my studies, generally speaking, when we're speaking about the female deities, they seem to be more associated with praxis, with experience, dancing, like the Maenads, and singing, whatever. But then with the male gods, they are very dogmatic. They're very much into logic or rules and study, etc. But you seem to have combined both somehow. And I'd like to know, is it through a particular goddess or working in a particular way that you're able to merge these two influences?
Wow, thank you. I think I just received a compliment. What do you think?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, I think that then I would have to, if you don't mind, that I progress, how I got interested in esoteric Hinduism.
Yes.
Because as I was traveling for Asia and I spent 4 years there, I studied first with Vedantis, which is the traditional, learning. You study Vedanta, and you learn that, about the higher self or the self. You are that, the capital T, that, capital T, that. And I was actually asked by one guru, to be his disciple, but I don't know, just intuitively felt that something was missing. And then I basically stumbled on a guru from esoteric tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, which is also could be called a form of Shaktism. And then I learned that actually Shakti permeates the whole universe. So Shakti is this feminine principle of creation. She's not replacing Shiva, because she's partnered with Shiva, but basically she is not only the creation, which is Prakriti in Sanskrit, but also the bliss of creation. She's the dance of creation. And then, for example, when we have a good spiritual practice and we actually experience the bliss, this kind of spiritual bliss or rapture, or religious rapture, then you're experiencing Shakti or Chitti. Her other name is Chitti. So this is the experience of this feminine aspect of creation. And I was completely hooked by that. And then later, when I was also studied the Gnostics, I realized that this is quite similar to the distinction between Shiva and Shakti is very similar what is between Pleroma and what comes out after Pleroma. Shiva, which is basically universal consciousness that is basically completely asleep, right? He's not doing anything. He's just kind of like, this pleromic cosmic soup, in his head. And then he has first thought. Look how similar it is to Gnosticism, like epinoia. He has the first thought, and then Shakti shows up. But, she's not only just showing up. She just started to dance in front of him and seduce him. And she says like, okay, maybe I'll create this, maybe I'll create that, and he's completely bedazzled because immediately he lost control, right? And she started to create these universes, but not in any mean way, a little bit like Sophia. That's why I learned a lot from Shakti when I studied Sophia. This is not a fall, really. This is not a sinful kind of movement, or she just, dances her way through, different in Sanskrit would call tattvas, but basically different levels of reality. And as she dances in great enjoyment, there is no sadness there, she realizes, oops, she forgot who she is. Because she went one tattva too low. And suddenly she has, not only that she had lost the access to the supreme consciousness, who she really is, she's the expression of divine consciousness, she has no idea how to go back.
It's like in the Hermeticism, where the man goes into the universe, the primal man, and he forgets everything because he sees he's not dancing, he sees a reflection of himself like Narcissus. And
that's right.
But in both, they're benign. Creation is a benign thing. We just forgot.
We just forgot. So that's why I like, and the reason why I actually originally got interested first in Buddhism and then in Hinduism, and I stuck to Hinduism, it is because when I read one book by some guy, Suzuki, I had a friend in Toronto who gave me this book, and he said, and then I learned later when I was traveling through Asia, that in Hinduism and in Eastern religions, really, you don't have the concept of sin. There's only ignorance. You just forgot your own greatness. You just forgot that you're a divine being. And I thought, how much nicer. I'm just so tired of being a sinner, and can I tell you a story? Like, for example, I was, top student in philosophy at the Pontifical Institute at University of Toronto. And, I'm going to get the award, but of course there's a mass first, right? Because I went to St. Michael's College. And everybody went to the communion except me. And the reason why I didn't go to the communion, it was because I thought I was a sinner, and the reason why I thought I was a sinner, it is because I didn't have a church wedding with my partner. So despite, that I was just so well educated at that stage, right? And I still thought, and I just got an award for top student. I got a medal and everything. I thought I was not worthy. You remember the words that you used to go to church, Father, I'm not worthy. I learned it in Polish, so I'm not sure if I can translate. I felt completely unworthy And I thought I was such a sinner. So when I actually learned for the first time in Hinduism, there is no concept of sin. I said, I'm running with it. I'm taking it. It makes much more sense to me. And even in classical Vedanta and classical Hinduism, it's just ignorance. Ignorance is redeemed by knowledge, or gnosis in Gnostic terms.
That's wonderful.
So all you need to know is find your gnosis. And what I like about Hinduism, esoteric or mainstream, it is they don't care what your gnosis is. As long as it gets you liberation, go for it, baby. Because you have to remember who you are. Yeah.
That's it. But here's a question, and then I want to go to Laurence. Obviously, we've talked in several interviews and on this show how the divine feminine in the West was slowly suppressed, taken off stage from, Ashira to Sophia to all the other goddesses. In Hinduism, it seems the goddesses are still prevalent, but Hindu society is still not exactly egalitarian, if you know what I mean. The goddesses are there, but it's still misogynistic, right? So what's up?
Oh, yes, it is. You are very right. It is very misogynistic. It's probably one of the most misogynistic societies. So I don't know what happens to a human mind. Shaktism is actually very big, especially in northern India. And they worship all of these goddesses, and all the boys that, first in India go to medical school. If you fail, then you go become an engineer. It's very structured. You pray to Saraswati to help you with the exams and so on. But basically, it doesn't mean that you treat women well. So it kind of didn't sink in, somehow the connection between a living woman and a goddess was not made, So that's very bizarre. Yeah, well said.
Well, something to explore. So, Laurence, do you have a question or a comment? The floor is yours, my friend.
Joanna, I'd like to, challenge you on your famous saying that if you want to be spiritual, ask uncomfortable questions, which I love. Many Gnostics around the 1st, 2nd, 3rd centuries believed that the earth or the world was an evil place. And this has continued on into the present. There are people, I'm sure, in the chat room and who are listening to this who believe that this world sucks. And yet, when we talk about Shakti and how Shakti fills the whole cosmos, and there's a bliss, a beauty about all the earth. There is nothing that is impure. How do we, I don't know quite how to frame this, but on the one hand, we're having Kashmir Shaivism that's saying that the world is filled with Shakti, is beautiful, nothing is impure. And then on the other hand, there are some Gnostics, not all, but some Gnostics that are saying, this is a prison, this sucks, this is a horrible place. So do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, this is a thank you, but you asked me a very complicated question. I try to apply myself. So I think this is basically a question that every spiritual tradition is wrestling with. This is basically the presence of evil. How it is possible, whether it is God, created by God, or whether it is this, seductive, beautiful Shakti that brings bliss to everything. How do we explain suffering in the world, right? Not perhaps even evil, but suffering. So this is very difficult to explain. I mean, to give a straight answer. So for me, the first time that actually I encountered this question, it was when I was at the Pontifical Institute, and I was really fascinated with Augustine of Hippo, which is a 4th century saint, but also a philosopher who became one of the first fathers of the church. And interestingly, I didn't know about Gnostics. I just knew that there were some heretics, but I didn't even know the Gnostics. He was a Manichaean originally who converted to Christianity.
Oh.
Wow. So he went the other way, So he's the famous father of the church, Saint Augustine, but the 4th century, or Augustine of Hippo, early 4th century. And the reason why he was a Manichaean, because Manichaeism kind of explained the presence of good and evil for him, right? And then when he converted to Christianity, and it's a complex story, his mother, Saint Monica, Santa Monica, like you have in California, it's after her, she convinced him that, that is the right thing to do. And it was a heartbreak for him because he had a girlfriend for 18 years, but he had to give her up because now he had to become really ascetic, because he became a bishop, and so on. So this question, especially in Christianity, was never properly answered. And I think Thomas Aquinas, especially after Augustine, was trying to answer in later Middle Ages, saying that this is the lack of goodness, the lack of good, which is a really lame thing.
Privatio
right?
bono, right?
That's right. Like it's just like it is really lame. So basically, all spiritual traditions, unless they are dualistic, have a problem with addressing the presence of evil. So I think in Kashmir Shaivism, it's not evil, but it's kind of suffering. So what happens, it is as Shakti, which represents us a little bit like Sophia in Gnosticism, in a way, when she's down, right? When she forgot who she is. Because of her ignorance, because forgetting of who she was, she starts to identify with her body and with her social and economic position. And then it causes her pain, because never mind that, you think you have to be a lawyer now, or, have a mortgage or something. You are in this body, which means you're probably eventually, as Buddhists say, you get sick and die. Buddhists saying as it is, doesn't matter how good your life is, eventually you get sick and die, right? Suffering is obvious in Buddhism. So because we identify with this body, this is where suffering comes from. But they believe that once you find your way back to who you truly are, you realize that this is just like a dress, because of course they believe in reincarnation. So you are here just on a wild adventure, and how to be a god as Joanna, how to be god as Miguel, how to be god as Vance, how to be god or Shakti as Laurence. And then remember, it's a short trip. And once you realize, that you want to go back, you eventually can go back even in this lifetime. You have to put up with suffering of this body, but through spiritual practice, through meditation, you at least can remember who you are and experience this bliss. But unfortunately, you have this body now. So fortunately or not, it may be a gift because you can have adventures, but obviously it will cause you a temporary death. So this is more about attachment to the body in Kashmir Shaivism and generally in Hinduism. Once you detach from your body, you're just in permanent bliss. And also, there's always another life.
That's really well said. I love how you said, but I want to turn the tables on to you, Laurence. How do you explain evil? What is your stance, amigo?
Goodness. I've spent all my life struggling with this. And I don't think I want to venture an explanation at this moment. I've thought about it. I've written about it.
I have a feeling you've probably faced evil spirits, knowing you and some of your...
I've faced some horrible things. Well, I can tell you a brief Sufi story about Shaitan. Someone asked the Shaitan, how could you be so horrible? In Islam, the story goes in the Quran that Allah created Adam and or the primordial human being, and placed it in front of all the angels, and said to the angels, bow down to this primordial human being. And all the angels immediately, except one. Guess who? Shaitan. And so they asked Shaitan, why didn't you bow down? And he said, because my love is only for the one, for the divine. I don't worship anything else except the one. I cannot worship this creature that you've made. So that shows a kind of singularity of purpose, of focus on something, something that I feel that, and I'd like to ask you, Joanna, about this in particular. In Gnosticism, in almost all the different schools of Gnosticism, we seem to have an ultimate reality. I think you call it the divine, but it is basically unknowable. It's basically alien in a sense, in the sense of being unknowable, ungraspable. But I sense in Tantra or Kashmir Shaivism that the ultimate is knowable in a sense. I need your thoughts. Is this true, or how do you regard the ultimate reality?
Yes, so I'll first answer your question about Kashmir Shaivism, and then I'll move to Gnosticism.
Okay.
In Kashmir Shaivism, yes, definitely this reality is accessible, because, for example, it is actually explained in this book, Pratahijna Pridayam, this one, and which was written by, as far as know, by Shema Raja in the 10th century, who was a disciple of Abhinavagupta, big tantric philosopher, and like the biggest, tantric philosopher. He wrote Tantra Loka. And there he basically describes the descent of Shakti, or the descent of Sophia in Gnostic terms. So she descends until Sutra number 13. So what happens until Sutra number 13, she goes down, and completely identifies with this body. Her mind is contracting too, so she doesn't have an access to the divine reality, right? She thinks that she has to be a lawyer, and the moment she starts to watch the Kardashians, she knows she's like lost it. Right? Like she starts to watch reality shows, for example. She knows she lost it. So she says, okay, I've done everything, right? Because she forgot who she is. I've done everything. I became a lawyer or a doctor. I have a nice car. I have a mortgage. I'm watching all the TV that, I'm supposed to be watching. Why, I am in pain, basically, right? So then what does Shakti do? In Sutra 13, she says, I'm going to look within. Because what is outside, really, I got lost in this playfulness. I actually don't know who I am anymore. There are so many things to do. None of them is making me happy. So I'm going to look for knowledge, for Gnosis. Of course, they look at different, they don't use the name Gnosis. I'm just trying to use Gnostic vocabulary.
What's the name you use? Just sorry for the interruption.
No, she's just looking within.
But there's no word for Gnosis.
There's no name. She's just saying, I'm going to look within.
Okay.
I can check actually Sutra 13, but I would have to.
No, keep going.
So in Sutra 13, she basically says, I'm moving away my focus from the outside world. I'm just moving it back into myself. And as she looks into herself, she starts meditating slowly. She not only remembers who she is, but also becomes one with Shiva again, with an undivided consciousness. So yes, it is knowable. You just have to look within. You cannot find it, despite all this beauty and also suffering, well put, Laurence, in the world. You actually cannot find liberation in the world. You can find liberation only looking within. So the moment you start to feel unhappy, and the moment you start to ask yourself questions, like, what's this matrix, right? The societal matrix, and we can discuss, our opinions on what this matrix is. You go within, and then you get in touch with your inner Gnosis by being still, basically. That's why it's very important, for example, in meditation, to stay still, for example, in Hinduism. Although, of course, I love also, Sufi, method as well. But basically, any way you do it, look within. And the more you look within, the more you start to see who you are, and you understand your position in this world, and your Gnosis saves you, but the Gnosis comes from looking within. So I think that in Gnosticism, when we look at like a bigger narrative of a story of Sophia, who is very similar, as like you posted my blog once too, one of Shakti, you know, it's a similar way, because although she falls, she eventually accepts it. The story is much more complicated, and you know, Christ consciousness comes and saves her, right? And she goes back there, but a part of her stays with us, right, to help us. So basically, she's still leading us back to this knowledge in a way, right? Once you get Gnosis, and also, you know, she helped us to create, for example, Noria, who has Gnosis. Right. So she left some, although, you know, she made a big mess out of everything, really. Right? She also left us with Set. She left us with Noria, you know, and also part of her is still, what is it called, a Chotma, or how do you pronounce it? Part of Sophia that stays with us.
In the Kabbalah?
In Gnostic narrative, and I'm here, my Gnostic narrative is based on Heller.
The divine spark, is part of
the divine spark.
And
so although she
would be the Jewish name for it.
You mean Chokma, right? Yeah.
Right.
But she is going. So she is going back. I'm not talking about Kabbalah yet. I think it's a Kotma or a Chotma. But she eventually makes it back with the help of Christ twin. You know, it's a complex story. But a part of her stays with us. Mm-hmm. To give us the divine spark, to give us the Gnosis, basically. So she's, in a way, still through Gnosis, she's walking us back to this divine reality, you know, to this undivided consciousness. So I think that even, maybe I'm just a born optimist, because when I read the Gnosticism, I get depressed about the social matrix in which we live. But I am absolutely certain, and I'm probably influenced by Hinduism here, that there is a way of knowing and there is a way of liberating. And Gnosis is that, you know, you just have to find your Gnosis. And yes, you may be trapped in a particular situation in your life, but you know who you are. And that's why in some esoteric sources, they say you have to, like you said, in Sufism and in Quran, that angels bow to human beings, because my goodness, we have to deal with all of this stuff. I mean, you have to be really, like, angels would cry, you know, like, take me back. And you are, you know, in this body, and you are in this body, and you still have Gnosis. This is like, wow, right? This is the biggest accomplishment you can have, not getting lost in the material. And even if you do, you walk back through your Gnosis. So I think that actually, as I said, maybe I'm a terrible optimist, but I think that Gnostics have a way out, you know, through Gnosis. That's why they're obsessed with Gnosis, you know. You just, how to get to this Gnosis. And unfortunately, mind you, I didn't study this as long as I studied Kashmir Shaivism. We don't have that many practical tools from Gnostics, right? They were lost somewhere on the way. There are some.
Mm-hmm. Right, that's so frustrating that we don't have more tools. And I've been experimenting with vowel sounds, and I'm a professional musician, and I found that to be very, very helpful and interesting in toning just the various vowels.
You're right, because their texts are full of vowels that just go for pages and pages. So they were doing some altered state of mind or meditation.
Yeah. And there are mantras that address it. And also in Kashmir Shaivism, they also say that, for example, the universe is a vibrating thing. So through saying certain mantras, you can uplift your vibration. It sounds like new agey, but, you know, this is basically what they say. It is like, it is a vibrating universe, the divine vibration.
Recently, I heard a scientist recently saying that string theory, which is basically, I'm far from being a scientist, but a vibration that creates the universe, it's also connected with a primordial vibration. And I love that connection. Also, the very act of, well, this opens up a lot of things, but the very act of intoning the name of a god or goddess, it's creating a vibration in the air. It's creating a kind of manifestation of the god or the goddess in the space that you are in. So I recommend that people experiment using these beautiful names that you've been speaking Parvati, Sarasvati, Durga, and Sophia, and just chanting these names and feeling how deep inside, like you said, look inside. And Rudolf Steiner would often say, listen for the echo, or be aware of what is resounding deep inside of you after you repeat this name. So that's something that I like to try. I'd like to ask you something about Advaita and non-dualism. How much are you exploring that? Do you feel that's an integral part of your studies, of your research, of your personal belief system, the non-dualism? Because, well, I got into quite a row with someone on the board here about dualism and non-dualism. But I'd like to hear, it seems that Tantra is very much Advaita. How do you feel about this?
Okay, there are some subtle distinctions that we'll have to make, but can I first address your first comment about chanting? So first of all, yeah, I love Gnostics, but I came to Gnostics through Hinduism, right? And it's a story, you know, that maybe I will tell some other time. But and when I started to be interested in Mary Magdalene and Western goddesses traditions, which maybe we address later, because I would like to cover this, if you don't mind, Miguel. My only issue with Gnostics is that I cannot find, you know, a practice, you know, like solid practice. So that's why I found it in Hinduism. And for example, chanting, which is vibrational, is very big part of it. And even recently I was listening to this very famous chant, Hey Jagadamba. Unfortunately, I chant, but I have a terrible voice. So, you know, people just forgive me because it's a devotional chant, but, you know, I would not dare to sing it online. So it's Jai Jagadamba. And even when I say it, I'm filled with bliss, you know, Jai Jagadamba. And Jagadamba is this permeating bliss of existence, right? So, and then after that come the names like Jai Saraswati, Jai Durga, Jai Parvati, you know, so like any aspect, you know, well, now I'm already blissed out, right? But why are you blissed out? Can I cover this first?
Please.
Why are you blissed out? Because, and this is what I discovered in Hinduism, they do not care for knowledge, which is kind of intellectual posturing that is very Western, you know. They say, I'm not interested unless it gives me liberation. Right, so all learning is really about liberation, and all learning has to come, and it's also very controversial, especially in the West. And my guru also got himself into trouble. But you really have to have a spiritual teacher who does not only convey the knowledge, you know, to you, but also transfers the Shakti to you. So then you have first-hand experience of the bliss, which is this feminine divine bliss. And otherwise, they say, if he doesn't give you Shakti, you know, through initiation, you know, which is basically touching on your forehead in my tradition, right? Then, you know, he's a learned guru, but he is not your guru because he doesn't connect you with the Shakti, he doesn't connect you with the Chitti, he doesn't connect you with Sophia. So once I had it, like had a full-blown, you know, initiation, and I was a serious academic, I just came out of curiosity, you know, and I had I made a performance, right? I had like mudras, I had like, they should have filmed it and suddenly would sell it for money, right? So I had a full-blown, you know, experience, and I stayed there for 3 months in complete bliss. Like I actually saw atoms, you know, like I didn't see reality. And guess how stupid I was? I would have been enlightened if I stayed there, but I wanted to finish my PhD and I brought myself down. Can you believe the dumbness? You know?
No. You brought the wisdom to us.
Anyway, so what I was trying to say later, when I was very connected to a particular ashram, a Jesuit scholar came to visit this ashram, and I can actually give his name. His name is Father or Professor Clooney from Harvard. And he's actually translating some Devi Sutras, which means songs to the goddess from Hinduism. And I told him, look, I was specializing in St. Augustine. I was a Catholic, but I let it go, and I'm here because of a Shakti. And he was really sad because, I felt like he felt, oh, we lost somebody. And he said, yes, I guess we lost Shakti in the church. I hope it doesn't get him into trouble. They probably don't want this stuff anyway, right? Because they're just in a different kind of loop. But and I think this is true, that because of what happened to Christianity, because of a rejection of Gnostic Gospels, because of institutionalizing, because of Romanizing it, because of Nicaea and so on in the 4th century, they completely lost the Shakti. Feminine or not, it's lost. And what we're left with is boring rituals, and this is what actually William James, the American philosopher, said. He said that the ridiculous situation of Western traditions, especially Christianity, is that we don't have a red hot experience of the divine. So instead of taking Jesus as he was portrayed, for example, in the Gospel of Thomas, he says, be like me, right? Or, for example, Gospel of Philip, don't be Christians, be like Christ. I love it, So he says, we are asked to worship the guy who had the original red hot experience with the divine, who was in ecstasy. So instead of asking him, hey, dude, how can I get the ecstasy, that you have? We just start to worship him. And made up whole kind of awful story about crucifixion and they lost me there. So what I mean is that in the West, we lost the Shakti, we lost the immediate experience of the divine. We just have set of some rituals and some horrible dogma that makes us guilty. So this is the part of it, and unfortunately, because we are so turned off, from Christianity because of that, and somehow I think and because Gnostics were persecuted, and that even if they had some different versions of something, I think in our mind it would ring untruth, because, they are probably similar to what Christianity had, right? I could be wrong here because I'm not very strong on Gnostic practice because I couldn't find much, on that. I'm still a student.
Yeah, Joanna, can I interrupt for a second? I just want to take a couple of the audience questions. Everybody's very excited in the chat room and you want to know more. So Vance, you got some questions from the kids?
Yeah, let's see. Since we're talking about the Indian goddesses, we have one about, what about Kali trampling down Shiva as representing killing the ego as a means of liberation? Is it possibly representing the left-hand path of overcoming the world by means of the world?
Yes, it can, but Kali is some people would argue that Kali came a little bit later to this equation. That's Kali. Wow, Vance, very good. Yes, and she's a combination a little bit of other goddesses, but she is a very powerful goddess and obviously very important in Shaktism as well, right? So she is basically, she in a way, she also creates the universe and reabsorbs the universe, right? And she's definitely the slayer of the demons. But my problem with Kali is because what was done to Kali later. So, for example, when you go in northern India to the temples of Kali, they do animal sacrifices to her. So there's this like on an industrial scale killing of animals in blood. And for me, any god that asks for sacrifice, especially blood sacrifice, that's why I never actually got into Kali, although she's a very important goddess, and very often she's also mixed with Durga, because the goddess Durga. And some people say that she's like a later interpretation of that. So the reason why I never got to Kali, and it's a fantastic question because she's very important in Shaktism, so thank you for this. I never really studied her closely because I was turned off by the whole worship of that goddess,
yeah, I did feel the same way. That was some
like blood is flowing on the stairs, it's that bad,
Well, that's Kali, right?
It's Kali, but I cannot get turned on by it. This is not the divine for me, but she's very important goddess. I don't want to upset her.
It was like the dark side, the evil. We were talking about evil before, right?
Yes.
And I think the essence of the evil part is that evil doesn't care that it creates suffering. It's anti-empathetic. That's pretty much the essence of any evil.
But the reason why, as I said, I didn't cover Kali, and I'm very aware of this overlooking of this, simply because, as I said, I was turned off by what I saw in the temples there, and so I decided I'm just going to stick with what works for me.
Yeah, got another one. Here's an interesting one about cross-dressing. Males who are shamans in tribes end up cross-dressing as women. This is kind of interesting in the light of the divine feminine, right? Is this a form of the divine feminine? You know, are they trying to emulate it? That's my parenthetical remark. Like Jesus has long hair. Well, I think that was a societal thing. And I'm not sure the real Jesus, if there was a real Jesus, had long hair. But anyway, you know, and he is wisdom, feminine, Sophia. What do you think? So there's the question.
Maybe Laurence wants to answer this because I think he's closer to shamanism. I have very kind of simplistic answer. Laurence, would you
more for Laurence?
All right.
Ooh, I don't know where to begin with cross-dressing.
North Beach.
I find it very interesting that in almost all traditions, there's an up and down. Maybe I'm skirting the question here a little bit, but the shaman has the ability to ascend a tree or some kind of cosmic axis, or the shaman can descend into the underworld. So there's the upper worlds that he can visit, or the underworlds that he can visit, or she can visit. There were and there are many female shamans, especially in Japan. I'm writing a new book about this, and I'm including information about the women shamans of Japan. And they were very, very fierce. They held political power. They stood up to the church. One bishop said to a woman shaman that she's evil and of the devil. And she said to him, well, get off your stupid throne and come here in front of me and tell me that face to face. So the women shamans I know did not bow to anyone. I don't believe a shaman would ever bow to anyone. And all I can think right now is that a shaman is a person with a foot in both worlds and can ascend or descend, and there's nothing new agey good about ascension or descension into the underworld. And that makes me think of Kore and Persephone in the underworld. And maybe Joanna, you can riff off of this, that Hades. Well, you have a slightly different story in one of your articles, but that Persephone, Hades kidnapped Persephone. And somehow took her down into the underworld. And I've heard various versions of this story, but it's supposed to explain the spring, the summer and the winter. Again, this duality. There's this nasty Hades in the world.
Okay, I'm happy here.
Okay.
First of all, I want to apologize that I don't know a clear answer about shamanism, because I'm just now exploring it a little bit. I know that this is true, actually, so the question is absolutely correct, that shamans dress in this way, and maybe they want to invoke the powers, both feminine and masculine, or sometimes they want to also, my understanding is they want to fool the demons. right? So they fooled the demons, so the demons don't really know who they are. So I think it depends also on the tradition, but I say I cannot give a very deep answer. But thank you for asking about Hades and Persephone, because actually it is a very new story. The story is much older. So can I move on to the Sumerian goddesses now? Because the story actually starts there.
Yes.
We have one more question. We do have one more question for the audience. And this is the longest waiting one, so I'm glad we can get it in. The questioner, and I forgot who it was, wanted to know about the relationship in history of the feminine with the moon, and then changing back and forth between the moon and relationship to the sun. So, you know, sometimes like in the Greeks were like the males were the sun goddesses and the females were the moon. And then I think the Egyptians, no, the Egyptians had Ra as the sun.
Actually, they've done research. Actually, it's wrong. Most moon gods are male across the world in totality. So,
okay.
Because the men were the ones who were always leaving and coming. The women in ancient were more steady. You know what I mean? You can depend on them, and they gave the life to the village. But
how about women sun gods? I can't think of one right now.
Okay, can I?
Yeah,
because
please,
actually this is a very good question to what I was trying to say, talk about Sumerian goddesses. Because all the Greek stories, you know, were relatively recent, right? So they basically kind of gave their own meaning to the old stories. And the stories that they are giving meaning to, the same like, for example, in Old Testament, which was also younger than Sumerian stories, they all come from Sumer in the West. So, and it also applies to goddesses and gods and the moon and the sun. So as I was trying to figure out things about Mary Magdalene, I eventually went down to the beginnings of it, as far as we know it, to Sumer, and even by, you know, kind of conservative scholars, you know, Sumerian culture is at least 7,000 years old. So it predates all of its other cultures. Greeks for sure, because first Greeks didn't show up until 1900 BC, right? So, so the first goddess, and Joseph Campbell actually wrote about her, is the goddess Ninma, which, you know, if you are interested in the Anunnaki, and we can go this way, right? She's the one of the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
And
I'm not saying it's aliens.
And I have some juicy stories, you know, but actually
alien theorists say yes.
So Nimna, she is the sun goddess, to answer this. She is the main goddess. She's sitting on the throne, and with her the whole story starts, as far as we know. So she sits on the throne. She's the sun goddess. Behind her there is all the stories that later were screwed up in the future, you know, are there already. She has a kind of erect or upward serpent behind her. So, you know, the serpent is there. The serpent represents, and there are arguments, you know, either, like I, as a Hindu, you know, lover, I would say awaken Kundalini energy, or it could be, some people say DNA, but it's a positive power behind her. The power is in the serpent behind her. In front of her, there's a tree of life, which is an axis between spiritual and physical, and allows the physical to basically ascend. And on the other side of the tree, there is a man sitting with horns and a moon on his head, which means he is reflecting only the light of the goddess, and she's passing him the fruit of life, which either she's creating him, which we have Anunnaki here, right? Either she's creating him or she's giving him Gnosis, you know, higher wisdom. She's giving him awareness, high awareness. So it all started with Ninma. Then after that,
that's Genesis, right? That's the Genesis story.
They completely rewrote it. They completely rewrote it, and it's much older than Genesis. And then in Goddess Inanna, the same story appears, and the story of descent. So to answer Laurence's question, the story of descent, because we know more about Inanna, she was invited to her sister's husband's wedding, and they were like the gods of underworld. So she just thinks she's going to a feast, but once she goes into the underworld, she gets caught. She cannot come back. So she manages to convince her grandfather or a brother, depending on the version of the story, Enki, to help her to get out. So she resurrects herself with the help of her grandfather, and she strikes the deal with the queen of the underworld. I forgot her name, complicated kind of, you know, Sumerian name, her sister, that she will go back forever to the earth, so she's undead, basically, she's alive again, but she will send somebody for 6 months to the kingdom of underworld. And she chooses her lover Dumuzi because he betrayed her when she was underworld. He assumed her power. So now the Dumuzi for 6 months of the year goes into the underworld, and for 6 months he's allowed to spend it with Inanna. So this is the original story, which of course Greeks later changed it. Because the story is much older. So the descent starts with Inanna, right? And both the goddess Inanna and the goddess of the underworld are goddesses, and it's the man who goes down, right? So and then it was, the gender was completely changed in other stories. But I just want to digress, if you don't mind, because as I was reading all of this fantastic book about Inanna, it's Inanna, Lady of Largest Heart. I really recommend it. Somebody actually translated from cuneiform, from Sumerian, the poems, and also described all the archaeology. And it's interesting because Inanna is very often showed also with the tree of life and with the dancing ecstatically with snakes in her hands. And so we have a serpent again. And here she mentions, oh my God, I have to find the page number if you don't mind. On page 30 of the book, she says it's really interesting because the goddesses before Inanna are usually represented as these maternal goddesses, the big women with, big breasts, because they're kind of fertility symbols, right?
Right.
And suddenly between the big goddesses of fertility and Inanna, they said, we found those figurines that are slim-waisted women, but they have a face of a reptile. We don't know how to explain it. So we hear about the Anunnaki and the reptiles.
The lizard people.
And on this figurine, and there's a picture of this figurine, this woman with the head of a reptile and a kind of reptile slint eyes, and with a big heavy eyelids. They usually nurture or give milk on the left breast to a young snake. And we said, we don't know how to explain it. How come suddenly this reptile goddesses showed up around? So I thought, I think this is really juicy thing about,
alien theorists say yes.
Something. And also she has scales on her shoulders. It looks like a jacket, but they're like scales, right? But the rest of her is completely human, just her face, her eyes, and she's milking, giving milk to a young snake. And
but
also
Joanna, isn't the snake a very potent image of the goddess because of the concept of rebirth? There are so many images of the goddess with snakes. So I wonder if there's a connection there because of the snake shedding its skin, being reborn.
Possibly, but archaeologically speaking, there is no explanation for it. And like in the cuneiform tablets, there is no explanation for it. So we don't know what the symbolism is, so to speak, right? Except that snake, you're right, is always there. And in 2012, I went to Crete on an academic conference and went to Gnosis, right? The labyrinth of Gnosis. And there you have also these women ecstatically dancing, the slim-waisted women again with serpents. And I realized that Gnosis was, the culture is also 9,000 years old. So when the Greeks arrived there, it was already ancient culture for them. So, but these goddesses represented with serpents are very, very kind of early representation of the goddess. So yes, but what does it represent? I don't know. I just give a modern, interpretation that for me, it's either awakening of a kundalini, of energy, or perhaps a awakening of our DNA. But obviously I'm biased from already very modern point of view.
That's amazing. I'm stunned. No, very excited about that. And I think it's something I wanted to talk about too, which we've touched upon. You wanted to talk more about medieval times, Joanna, which is your area of study. What was your area of study? You said medieval.
Well, actually, not necessarily, because I just wanted to say that Middle Ages are completely misunderstood. They're super interesting. When usually Westerners start to be interested in Renaissance, but it's not really goddess related, so you can skip. But Renaissance basically came from basically Byzantium, right? Mm-hmm. Because all the scholars and artists had to escape when Byzantium fell, and they carried the knowledge of that was more ancient knowledge from the Roman Empire. But although I was a medievalist, I actually specialized in late antiquity, right? So I was interested in about what was between the late Roman Empire and early Middle Ages.
Okay, well, let's get down and dirty and talk about sex.
Okay,
I'd like
that
to...
was my next question, believe it or not.
You've been waiting
Man,
for 1 hour.
we couldn't wait. We were just biding our time. Well, we already talked about, I love this ancient myth because with the Sumerians, because I do agree that the men should go down on the women instead of bad joke, but I had to say it. So anyway, go ahead, Laurence, talk about or ask about sex.
Well, yeah, okay, let's talk about sex. Okay, a couple that has great love for each other. How do they continue to engage in the divine play of Eros? How do they keep alive Eros? Or is it possible? Does a couple necessarily need to leave that behind? Or can a couple grow in their experience of love for one another and their experience of Eros, and to deeper levels? What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, that's an interesting question, and I certainly hope that people don't have to give up sex, just because they've been together for a long time. However, if you think about this kind of question, first of all, would be asked by somebody in Neo-Tantra, right? And most of the Tantra taught in the West is either Neo-Tantra or basically the Chinese Tantra, of which I'm not a specialist. The true kind of tantric from Hindu perspective would not be really interested in improving sex life of a couple, because sex, like everything else, is used for your enlightenment. So their point of view was, like Tantra Loka chapter 29, Abhinavagupta, you engage with this because it's such a power, like we know it's power. If you can engage the power of Eros, in English, Eros, to get you there, to give you this experience of divine, of universal consciousness, use it, and there are ways of using it. But and I know that people really do not want to hear this, because this is what they were taught in the West by Neo-Tantra. Tantra by itself is completely not interested in your sex life. They said use sex life for liberation, not to improve your life with your partner. Although in the West it is being taught like that. So I just want to stress it. It is supposed to be...
What is the difference between Tantra and Neo-Tantra, just for the audience?
Well, Neo-Tantra is basically what was introduced to the West, after, lots of Americans and Westerners went to, to Osho and so on, right, and Pune and other places. And there's nothing wrong with this, because they just appropriated it, right? They appropriated it because why not? Of course, couples do struggle with this, especially, when you're together for a long time. It's very difficult to capture Eros or Eros forever. So they devised some tantric methods, that would help couples with this. But I never actually started it. And although I had a tantric experience, sexual experience, which I described in my blog, and I'm happy to talk about it, it was purely grace, meaning it just, I just had it, right? And I fulfill certain conditions that, Abhinavagupta in chapter 29 says, you have to do certain things to have this experience. And I just happened to fulfill this conditions. And I had a spontaneous tantric experience, which is fantastic. It's actually a meditative experience, and you actually feel the energy Kundalini moving through your body and like hitting you in your heart chakra and hitting you in your head. And then it just pauses for a moment, and this is completely conscious energy. It's not some kind of, orgasmic energy. It's completely conscious energy. And it's almost like try to make up its mind. You're going to have an orgasm, or you're going to have a enlightening experience, and just move in this opposite direction when you suddenly and your partner are in complete bliss, right? Meditative bliss. So this is the experience. But in my case, I wouldn't know how to, and I always admitted to this, I wouldn't know how to repeat it. It was like a, act of grace. I just studied Tantra, and I fulfill certain conditions, and it just happened to me. It's like, Sophia or Shakti Kundalini just entered me, and I spilled it on my partner as well. But
Joanna, that is extremely beautiful, that experience you just described. I read that in your blog. I highly recommend your blog to everyone. I please want to ask you something. You wrote that Tantra is based around an awareness of the potential consequences of the claim that morality is just a social convention. Now that sounds very antinomian to me. And you put in a proviso, and I'd like you to please clarify this for the audience, that not just anyone can pick up a book about Tantra and start doing antinomian behavior. You recommended a more spiritual basis before one begins a path like this. Am I correct?
Absolutely. And I think that this is a problem with Osho-Lice, whom I actually respect, but he just lost the plot, I think, in my opinion, at certain point. But what happens, it is that when you read Abhinavagupta, he basically, this practice was advised only to most advanced spiritual aspirants. You were already initiated to a particular tradition. You already had an energy awakening done through, which is non-sexual, as I said, it's just touch on your head usually. And you already committed practitioner. Even before this, there's a set of rituals and mantras that purify you. Basically, by purification means it's not you're dirty or, you're sinful. It means that it focuses your mind on the divine. And then, under the guidance of a guru, you engage in the sexual activity. So this is the proviso that this is not for everybody, and I know that people don't want to know it because they just want to have great sex with their partner, which is, you have Kama Sutra for it, you still have but this is not Tantra. I just want to say, this is not Tantra according to Tantric philosophy. Kama Sutra, use Kama Sutra if you want to improve your sex life. However, returning to the main point of your question, is that once you are in a higher state of consciousness, everything is the same in a way, so this kind of distinctions between good and evil, what you should do in bed, what you shouldn't in bed, should I sleep with this person, should I not sleep with this person, are not relevant, so to speak. However, the problem with engaging in this kind of activities, that once you fall down, because unfortunately we all descend, as I told you, I descended too, right? Then suddenly you're still faced with this reality and consequences of it. Maybe you slept with the wrong person. Maybe you caught, some disease. I don't know, hopefully not. But what I mean that what is pure, everything is pure according to Tantra. So pure and impure is basically a distinction for how to function in society so we don't step on each other's toes, and we don't hurt each other. So it is a kind of it's almost like basically knowing how to behave yourselves, right? But in Tantra, it's not a moral judgment. Do you understand? It's not a moral judgment. It is basically, you should be nice to each other. And that's why there are societal rules. But it's not that it's, for example, wrong in the eyes of God or on a divine plane of divine consciousness. Especially it's done in heightened state of consciousness. And I can say something very controversial perhaps, but I think this is the problem of some gurus who are getting involved in a higher state of consciousness in sex with somebody who also probably reaches higher state of consciousness, but then the gurus can possibly hold it, and the person who is just invited to the ritual cannot hold the higher state of consciousness, and then they are thinking like, why did I do this? Because you suddenly, the world looks different. You suddenly back in the matrix, and for a moment in the sexual ecstasy that took you to divine consciousness, you actually had a completely different vision of a universe. But when you fell down and you think like, why did I do this? Like, I had this experience. What does it mean? Are we in a relationship now? Right?
I want a relationship with the guru.
I want a relationship with the guru, and he says, well, no, we just had a tantric experience, and it becomes a big mess. But I don't want to, because I don't want to say something wrong, because I know lots of women had very bad experience, and this is, you know, I completely respect it. I'm just trying to explain it from a kind of a point of view, philosophical point of view. And the same it says in Gospel of Thomas, you know, not about sex perhaps, but, you know, it is basically, do not try to do certain things, do not try to improve a world in certain stage, he says, just reach the high state of consciousness, right? Because then, you know, you almost have to uplift yourself and you enter like a different, speaking Hindu vocabulary, different tattva, different level of the world, so to speak, right? So the rules there do not apply with the same rules that apply here on our tattva, on our plane of existence. So I know it's very controversial, but Tantra is very clear about it.
Okay, Joanna, pretend that we're in, I don't know, kindergarten, first grade.
No sex in kindergarten, no.
Okay, let's see. Where does one, in your opinion, start? Where does one begin to know the goddess directly? Not know about her intellectually, but how does one begin? Where is a good beginning? Or it could be a book, a movie, a song.
Okay. I think that's why I said, although I'm an academic, I was not really interested in influences, historical and political influences. I was more interested in practice. So I think it's very individual. And I think that reading about things is just a like introduction, so you actually know that something like that exists. Because, for example, when you start reading about a goddess, for example, then or spiritual practice, or even a state of rapture, bliss, you want to experience it yourself, and then you go on the path. But I think it's very individual. For me, it happened, as I said, in Kashmir Shaivism and through initiation. Before, I just was reading about it for years and years, you know, dutifully. And then I just went just to check it out, you know, for the initiation process. And then, you know, I had a full-on, as I said, experience of Shakti path, as it is called there. So Shakti started to flow through me. And I again know that Westerners usually do not want to hear about it, but very often you need a guru for this. Although sometimes people, especially in the early 70s, experience spontaneous Shakti, you know, movement after taking psychedelic drugs or something. I do not recommend it, because I'm actually really clean. I never even smoke a dope in my life, you know, or weed or whatever it is called. I didn't smoke a cigarette, you know. So I don't have it, but I know some people who had spontaneous awakening of Kundalini, but even they usually had some exposure to a teaching of a tantric guru. Because, you know, they went to India and then, you know, smoked something, and then they suddenly had a spontaneous awakening. For me, it was just kind of formal initiation. So even my guru said, my former guru said, you know, it is really an act of grace to receive it, you know, to experience it. And it takes an ardent seeker. It's not like, oh, I'm going to just try it out, you know. You read about it, you long for it, perhaps you go on a trip somewhere, like, because, you know, you want to be closer to a particular tradition. And you meet the right people, and there are certain synchronicities, and it happens. But you have to surrender to the path. It's not a quick fix.
I think you're so right that it's the yearning. You can't just like say, well, I really want this experience. It sounds cool, but it's got to be like a deep yearning. And this is why, like, I find attraction to bhakti forms of yoga, devotional, because it pulls something out of you, a love, a yearning, that seems to be the spark, at least in my life.
Yeah, yearning is very important, but I'm not into what I like also about Hinduism. It is that any path is good. So, for example, Bhakti path is very good. I'm not really a Bhakti, because I'm kind of natural rebel. That's why I'm interested in Gnosticism. So I say, no. Don't ask me to do these rituals, right? And so on. But I've been an ardent student, you know, so I just devoured everything that came my way, you know, to learn about it. And then the yearning was even bigger. So I started to travel. I started to, you know, seek, look for a guru, and eventually I found the guru in a different place completely, you know, but I found him. So the yearning is really important, but paths are many, right? Like I'm definitely not a bhakti because I'm like hell-bent, right? Like I just, you know, don't tell me this, you know, until it really makes sense to me, or like I feel that Shakti, he's giving me the Shakti, so I'll listen to him, but you know, but yearning is important, although it doesn't necessarily have to be devotional. It just, you know, for me, it was like this kind of almost yearning for, like my guru calls it, a spiritual bug enters you. You know, you just want to know, you want to experience it, but you want to experience it not intellectually, but with your whole being. You give up a job and go to India. I'm not saying you have to do it, or, you know, you go somewhere else. It is just of primary importance for you. So in this way, you are committed and you're really devotional. You're right. Like this is becoming a prime focus of your life. It's not something that, you know, like, yeah, I go for a tantric workshop and see whether I'm enlightened after that. You know.
And Joanna, for the audience, we've talked about this before, but how did you become interested in Gnosticism? What exactly connects you to the Gnostics? Again, you went all the way to the East, away from Christianity.
And I was very happy. And it's a crazy story, you know, because I had to, by then I lived in Melbourne. And, you know, I met these two guys who were like Urantia readers, and they said, come with us to Jerusalem. We'll make some archaeological discoveries based on Urantia book, and, you know, and write a book. And I thought, fantastic. So I write a book, but I had no interest really in Urantia. But once they said, come to Jerusalem, I really experienced what, I don't know, maybe in Sufi language, it would be explained like the holy madness. You know, I was perfectly happy as a little Western Hindu, you know, and it's almost like something entered me, like a fire entered me. And it's interestingly, one of these men, probably not knowing even what he was doing, handed a book to me, which was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, of whom I've never heard as part of my, you know, pontifical education, right? And I never heard about Gnostics even until then. And it was a translation by Jean-Yves Leloup. And it blew my mind.
It's a wonderful translation, yeah.
And the reason why, because then I was already influenced by Hinduism, because Jean-Yves Leloup is also a practitioner. So he's not a dried out scholar who, you know, just, oh, in Coptic, you could translate this word or that word. He translated it as a spiritual seeker, right?
Yeah, he's like a Christian, right? He's still a Christian, yeah.
Yeah, yes. He's still a Christian. He was a Catholic priest. He gave it up and he became Greek Orthodox priest because, you know, he could marry and, you know, and he wanted to try. So in my opinion, he liberated the Gospel of Mary Magdalene the way, I'm not sure whether Laurence will agree with this, Coleman Barks liberated Rumi, you know, that it became suddenly really sensual and beautiful and not just like, oh my God, you know, what is this guy saying? You know, how could he be ecstatic when it's so boring to read it? You know, and Coleman Barks, you know, liberated him. And I think that Jean-Yves Leloup liberated the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And once I started to study Mary Magdalene and I started giving talks about her Gnostic Mary Magdalene, then it was like, as you call it, a rabbit hole. I started to discover, okay, Isis, what's the connection between Mary Magdalene and Isis? What is the connection between Mary Magdalene and Inanna? What is the connection between Mary Magdalene and Nimna? You know, so this is how it happened. It was like one of the synchronicities I was not interested, and it was thrown upon me, and I just ran with it, you know, with great passion.
Let's talk about the future. You write some amazing things about ideas, about possibilities for a spirituality or a religion of the future. And I know Joseph Campbell was speaking about the importance of symbols, that they not refer to historical events. He said they refer through historical events to spiritual or psychological principles and powers that are of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and that are everywhere. So I was wondering, which spiritual symbols do you think are worth carrying into the future, and which symbols do you think we need to get rid of?
Okay, so this is a very interesting question. I actually didn't give much thought about symbols because I usually work with ideas, less with, I'm not very visual in this way, symbols. But for example, and I hope I'm not upsetting too many people, like I cannot deal with a cross. No crucifixes for me, no cross. I think it sends completely wrong message. And I think we've been brainwashed with this. For me, the only Jesus that or Christ that I can if embody it, that I can accept is from the Gospel of Thomas, and he's basically a teacher. He wants to give us Gnosis. Cross, actually, I believe it or not, I once met a nun who said, I don't know why everybody in Christianity focuses on crucifixion when we should focus on his teachings. And I thought, bingo. I didn't
Constantine. It was
Yes.
Constantine. Yeah. By this sign I shall conquer, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I said I would get rid of the cross for sure. And what other symbols? I don't know. I think I don't know how to answer this, but I think that.
Well, let me maybe help you out because you were talking about that, if I understand you correctly, that the ultimate reality transcends God and goddess, masculine or feminine. Is that true? Is that your belief or feeling?
Yeah, it is my belief. So the reason why I'm interested in divine feminine, it's not because I want to kind of replace God with a goddess. I just think that one aspect of the divine is completely forgotten and we desperately need it. We need this bliss, we need this balance, we need this harmony, we need this interconnectivity, and she's somehow collectively awakening in our consciousness, right? So that's why, I'm just trying to balance, but I'm not interested in replacement of the feminine, of masculine with the feminine. It's just that this part is missing. And look at our society. I think that the emergent society in which we live is really suffering from lack of Shakti, and it's just very much one-sided. And we can enter this discussion, what is this emergent society, whether it is actually some demonic presence, and some people would argue that it's some kind of demonic presence, and we can talk about it, or perhaps it's our own mind that we felt so low that we created this monster ourselves, this current society.
It could be both.
Or it could be both. And for example, I read this book Unfoldment by Neil Kramer, and I think that I completely disagree with him politically because I don't want to get into American politics, but I think he lost the plot there. But he is an esoteric teacher, although he would never tell us what esoteric tradition he follows. And I read his book, and he said that he knows people, and he knows people who experience it, that there is actually archonic presence, that the most powerful people on this planet, and that the most powerful people, like, they are not presidents, but let's say like Rupert Murdoch, the true bad guys, so to speak, that they're actually under control and perhaps in a position of worship towards these archonic forces. And I thought that was very interesting because he's usually a practical man, so for him to say something that outrageous, I thought that's really interesting, because I was always personally of the thought and idea that we created it. It's our sick consciousness. We just contracted so much that we created this prison for ourselves. But once I read him, I thought maybe, the story of the archons, is not so. Some people, there's like conspiracy theories love that story, and there may be some truth about it, So I don't know if you want to run with it or not. Or whether viewers want to run with it, or should we move on in a different direction?
I'd like to run with it, unless Vance, do you have a question, or anybody from the audience have anything?
I haven't seen questions from the audience. You just opened a whole can of worms, though, in terms of how we got trapped down here, right?
That's right. That's right.
But, well, the way I see it, like, okay, you have the ultimate God, and he splits himself up into different pieces so he can have somebody to play with. Before you know it, there's the bad guys and the good guys, and then the bad guys trap the good guys. See? And so,
so it's basically a descent of consciousness. Yes, a descent of consciousness.
Because to be an individual is to be isolated from there's you and everything else. So right there's a fall, there's a division. So it's natural. And you talk about a Shakti and Kali, that I think I see those two as a polarity, between creation and destruction.
Yes.
Every universe has to have creation and then taken apart, put it together, take it apart.
That's right. And it's quite interesting because Michael Kramer wrote this really interesting book recently, Human Devolution. And he's obviously talking from a kind of Hindu perspective, but he's saying that actually we kind of, and it's very Gnostic in a way also, that we basically descended like Sophia. We keep descending and we keep descending and we keep descending, right? So, and eventually there is a kind of period of destruction where, you know, and there's a new creation and so on. However, according to Hinduism, we are now in Kali Yuga, and only for the last 5,000 years, and I think it lasts few million years. So, you know, we are going to be trapped in this reality for a while, according to Hinduism. And this is the lowest point, they said, in a descent. After that, we are going up again, but it's few more million years, you know.
Yeah, I thought last year was the lowest point, but this year just proved that.
Yeah, but who knows when they're right? There is just a, you know, Hindu imagination.
Oh boy. I don't even know what this is a whole can of worms. And do you see, are things at least in any shape, way, or form moving in a better direction? I mean, all four of us and the people in the chat room pretty much, well, for the most part, we all agree we need more of an integration of the anima and the animus. We need
That's right.
more we're not saying one side is better or gender, you know, we just, again, we want, as Laurence was talking, that primal man that Satan was pissed off. We want to get back to that state of mind. Are things getting better, or do you see, are we still pretty much in the same boat? I mean, again, you're talking about India is still a mess, and the West seems to go from one extreme to the other, and it's always leading to some sort of self-destruction.
So, okay, that's just my personal point of view. So I do believe that we are going through some period of deconstruction, you know, so we are reaching a certain, like a tipping point, because we are doing things wrong, you know. However, there is probably enough awakened people. Look, we are having this conversation, people bother to show up, right? So obviously there's some awakening going on, and we definitely will raise again, but at the moment, I think as civilization, we are definitely going through the process of deconstruction. We are going down. And even historically speaking, it very much reminds me, you know, you asked me about specializing in something, the end of the Roman Empire. You know, like it wasn't immediate, it was extremely gradual. And this is what I see happening to actually globally now, not only to the West, but globally. So I think we are definitely reaching some end. And from this end, I do have hope that things will be rebuilt, because there's, you know, we are raising our consciousness, you know, and I think that especially when you look at religions, people are very often, you know, like in the West, at least, they are living organized religions. And some Westerners who convert to other religions, and even if I, you know, you could say I've never converted, but, you know, play with Hinduism and so on, it's really sometimes out of desperation, you know, because, but this kind of Western converts, we take it from a highest shelf, so to speak. You know, we don't deal with the lowest denominators of organized religions, you know. So I think that as religions are falling apart, there will be a new thought emerging. You know, there will be a new thought emerging, which will be much more creative and much more positive. But perhaps you want me to finish on a positive, but I think first we have to go through this process of deconstruction, unfortunately. And I think it would be silly to deny that we are going through this, you know, the destruction that happens environmentally and on every possible level.
Yeah, that's very good ideas. Laurence, how about you? Are you positive, or what do you think the state of humanity is?
Well, I think a great deal about the human brain, especially the limbic system and the reptile brain and so forth, which may connect with the Sumerians or whatnot. But my basic point is that it seems that we are scared to death about what's really inside our minds. And Joanna, you were talking about watching the correct soap operas or reality TV shows. We look for anything to distract us, if it's fantasy football leagues, if it's, I don't know what, we have all sorts of gambling problems. People are into every kind of addiction. There are so many 12-step groups that exist for so many addictions. And why are people getting addicted? In my opinion, one of the biggest reasons is the pain inside themselves. And there is a great deal of suffering in the world, but there are ways to explore this pain. And I think a great fault with many gurus is that they will grow up in India and meditate with their master on top of a mountain and learn all these great spiritual truths. But we have many aspects to our being. We have a mental aspect, we have emotional aspect, we have a physical aspect. Now, it's sort of like saying, I mean, some people are into bodybuilding, right? And they ignore spirituality, they ignore their emotions, they ignore learning anything. And then there are people who are solely intellectual, and so they ignore exercise. I believe that we need to start exploring methods to explore this very dark, I don't know if I should say shadow because it brings up Jung, but this shadow that is inside ourselves, this part of ourselves that is very reptilian, and it's very much alive, and it has its needs. It wants sex, it wants its territory, and it will fight for its territory. And I don't think you can truly live a spiritual life if you have never faced those reptiles that are living in your limbic system, or wherever you want to call it. You're just fooling yourself. If you've never opened a book, if you've never do any exercise, it's a complete package, in my opinion. That's what for me, that is what I would like to see in the future. That people, well, for example, just dream work. Dream work can reveal an enormous amount of what's going on in the anima and animus, the masculine and feminine inside ourselves. So that's my 2 cents.
Really, really well said, Laurence. And I think that, yes, we have to look at our shadow, and also we have to look within. You remember that 13, right? We have to start looking within and not be scared. That's okay. You know, there are demons there. We all have them. And, you know, and it's not easy, but we do. And also suffering is very important too, because usually it throws us on the spiritual path. So there are very few people that, you know, didn't suffer and started to be spiritual. You have to go like all the way down. You know, I was just joking about Kardashians and, you know, reality shows. But what I mean, you experience suffering of some form. And then you say, okay, I'm trapped here. What I've been doing is not working. You know, I have to look deeper. And it starts with looking within. So that's why I think that as much, and I hope I won't insult, you know, my Gnostic friends, but as much as, you know, there may be some archons and, you know, and some demonic powers, actually the power lies within us, you know, and we have to deal with our own pain, with our own suffering, and also with our own fear. For example, I in my life experienced lots of fear, and I changed the situation recently to escape this fear, and then I encountered the fear in a different form. Because why? I should have known better, you know, like, what causes me suffering is this propensity to feel fear about particular things in my life. And so really, and I can address it only looking within, and each of us has a different demon, you know, for me, it is personally fear, you know. So, and this is when inner work starts. And unfortunately, as I said, that's why I look into the spiritual traditions of Asian spiritual traditions, and because psychology, modern psychology, Western psychology completely doesn't address it. You know, it's extremely superficial, except maybe for Carl Jung, you know, because he's talking about shadow, he's talking about animus and anima and so on. However, I think that part of the suffering also comes from our own rejection of the feminine, and of anima, and I'm going to talk here now very briefly about that. By that I mean in both women and men. You know, like it's not that women are definitely closer to the feminine, not necessarily. You know, we see ourselves from a masculine point of view, you know, and sometimes women are most cruel to other women too. You know, I think it's just kind of an unspoken truth as well. So we, all of us, you know, despite of our gender, we have to ask ourselves why we are afraid so that of that power. You know, what is going on there? This is, I think the feminine or anima is actually one of our shadows, not because it's bad, but we somehow repressed it and refused to look at it for at least last 2,000 years.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, there is nothing wrong with the shadow. If we address the shadow and integrate the shadow, it gives so many gifts. It's facing that dragon in the underworld. It's just got to be done. And yeah, fear.
But this is kind of a superhuman effort, right? Like you, and because we are, I think the society is structured this way that we are basically running around like mad people, you know, trying to pay the bills, but, you know, hardly anybody has time to look within, right? So it's almost like a setup, you know, how much, you know, are you going to give some time to it? Can you even find time for this? You know, so that's a very difficult question. And exactly when you're talking about the reptilian part of ourselves, this is the reptilian part that is basically based on survival. If we could get away from the, you know, survival problem, but then how do we get, you know, like pay the rent, you know, like pay the bills, you know, it's never somehow, you know, it's depressing in this way, right? So, but I think the salvation lies, and this is what actually Gnostics were spot on. Salvation lies within you, in your Gnosis. You know, you have to look within. There's no other way, you know. And once you look within, once you find this power within yourself, you know, even archons will have to worship you because they stop existing, you know, because you say, you know what, I'm so not afraid of you. I conquered this fear. You know, like, so it is like, actually, I was talking to someone who thought that, you know, he encountered in his meditation an archon, this horrible person, you know, came up to him in meditation. And because he's a very wise man, you know, he just kind of, he says, I just got scared first time, and it came second time, I just embraced it and it disappeared, you know. So I think it comes with not being afraid and walking in the different direction where your fears are, you know, just don't act out of fear, just look into this. And I truly believe that the power lives in, you know, in Gnosis, and Gnosis lives within us, you know. So we just have to make this effort to look into the spark within yourself. And then, you know, no archon is, you know, powerful. So as I said, I'm optimistic in this way. But it takes an individual effort and it takes a collective effort.
Can I say something about the divine feminine?
Yes, please do there. Holy guacamole.
Yeah. I'm an experiencer. And I told Joanna about this. And without going into that whole story, I'm kind of getting something right now about, you know, masculine versus feminine, putting aside the fact that, you know, it's the black guy in prison. We think that being caught in the flesh is bad and someday we'll get in the paloma. If you look at the above and so as above, so below, we're here experiencing, and this is what I believe the one being intended for each one of us, whether, you know, we like it or not. But the essence of the feminine for me is, number one, the feminine is what propagates life. It nurtures life, it grows life, and it takes care of life. And, you know, and we all have mothers, and if we had good mothers, you know, that's a experience on the normal level. And the masculine is the more adventurous, you know, biologically and, you know, archetypically goes out and, you know, gets food or whatever. And so that the feminine can be left. And that's kind of the most pure idea I have in my mind for that. And in terms of our society, we are starting to miss that nurturing from our own society. You know, society should have a divine feminine aspect to it, where it watches out for the ones that it cares for. And let's face it, society kind of gave birth to us. If you think of our language, our culture, all that, society gives birth to us, nurtures us. But just as in, we're human beings, the feminine can turn on its child. And I feel that our society is starting to turn on its children. And that, in that sense, I don't think things have gotten better. And also we have the overbearing mother that tries to run the child's life, and when a society tries to run people's lives. So I think our human experience of our mothers is very instructive, and on a divine scale too. And my experience, going back to that of the divine feminine, was so much love and caring and support, and saying that you are a worthwhile person. But in this society where we are becoming impersonalized through machines, right? And archons are machines, right?
Mhm.
And gosh, I do this for a living, so I know about machines. Believe me. In this society, we are all being plugged into the machines, there you go. So that's pretty much what I want to say. And one more thing I'll add. I think another kind of life form is trying to assemble itself, and I'm not sure it's a good one, where we're all plugged into these little holes like in the Matrix, and there is no masculine, feminine, or whatever in a big machine. Someone asked, in fact, about whether the internet has an effect on all this and on femininity, divine femininity, and you bet it does, because essentially robots don't need, the factory is their mother. So that's my reflection on the divine feminine, and it's wonderful. And I wish I could tell people how to get in touch with the divine feminine. It just happened to me, like a lot of other things.
Comment on matrix very quickly? I think that there are actually two types of matrix. One matrices. One matrix is the one from film Matrix, right? Which is, I call it societal matrix, and we are definitely run by this, until we awake, until we look within. But I think there's another matrix, which is actually feminine divine matrix, which is a very much organic, universal energy matrix. And somehow this matrix that, the film portrays is basically like a virus, it just puts like this kind of glass or wires that separate us from our divine matrix, which is basically the feminine divine matrix that runs through the universe, which is this universal energy. And that somehow, wrapping up on what we're talking all the time, on different divine narratives, we just have to, the only way of disconnecting from this matrix that you have behind yourself is basically going within, because this is not the only matrix. This is what I was going to say. This is almost like there is some kind of shield, and conspiracy theorists love it, around the solar system. And
Yes.
Urantia book is talking about it, and apparently some scientists say that there is some density around solar system, or I'm not a scientist, so I cannot really verify that. But this is this matrix that runs us, it's very limited matrix, and there's a bigger matrix, and it's a divine matrix, and what is represented in our collective subconscious as a feminine side of creation is actually then, it is reaching out to us, like Sophia, that, she's back there right now, but she's reaching out to us. She's giving us Gnosis. She's giving us Noria. She's giving us Set. She's giving us maybe even Christ. Whoever you want. She's giving us Buddha. So she's reaching out to us, and we can reach out to her through looking within, because this artificial matrix is just a small virus. It's just a small. You just small archons. You're just small. So there is the bigger divine outside of it.
Cheap copy.
It's just some kind of demented version. I don't know if it's we created or someone else created. Not important anymore. There is the other, and I want us to connect with this other matrix, which is totally divine and is represented by the feminine divine.
Well said. Well said.
Very well said. Yes.
Amen to that.
Well,
women.
Hey, women. Well, I do hope we can leave a better world to Keith Richards. That's always been my choice. When we're all gone and he's still around.
Yes, the eternal one.
Yes, it's very important. Well, Well, I think we're at the end. Laurence, is there anything you would like to say before we wrap things up on this very...
Only that this has been a great pleasure, and I've really enjoyed talking with you, Joanna. It's an honor. I wanted to tell you that when Miguel first asked me if I could be on the show, I thought, gee, aren't Joanna and I friends on Facebook or something? And then I thought, well, maybe we met at a conference. I know Joanna. So I saw a photo of you and I said, yes, I know her. So I looked for some videos of you on YouTube, and I discovered that I discovered you, I think, about 5 years ago on some YouTube videos. So I am a fanatic of your work, and I'm so impressed. And I saved all your videos, and I just wanted to let you know that I've been watching you since, well, 5 years, more or less.
Thank you so much. It's very sweet. And I want to thank you, Laurence and Miguel and Vance. And it was so wonderful to be hosted. And, I just shared, I'm just a spiritual seeker. So I'm just sharing as I'm going. So I really apologize if I couldn't answer all the questions, because I'm still journeying, so it's, and I'm not playing, here a wise woman. I'm just a spiritual seeker who keeps journeying, and 2 years from now probably no more, but at this stage this is all I know. So thank you for allowing me to share it with you, and thank you for your support. I truly appreciate it.
No, it's always a pleasure having you, and we should do it again. But for the audience, tell us about your websites where they can find more of your work. I'll have it in the show notes. For the audience, obviously I'll put it in the YouTube show notes, and then in a couple of days I will put, as always, the audio version for iTunes and iHeartRadio and Spotify and all that. So I will put Joanna's information. But tell the audience tonight that wants to know about where to find your work.
Well, probably the best way is to go to my blog, which is Goddess News. Goddess, if you type on Google Goddess News, I'll come up. I have a website, joannakujawa.com, but it's difficult to spell my last name. So it's probably better just to Google Goddess News, and it will take you to my blog. And I'm currently working on some books, but they will not be, one of them will not be out until March or so. So the best way is basically, or YouTube, check me out on YouTube if you're interested in some talks. So as I said, I'm just sharing what I know at the moment, and I continue journeying.
And our articles are excellent. As Lauren said, I always enjoy them, and it's really good stuff. So you heard and check it out. And for your audience out there, please support this show. I hope you're enjoying Aeon Byte Live in the show. We're just we're trying to get the light out there. So please support it in any way you can. Please support our guests. Laurence, tell us about where the audience can find out about you before we go.
Well, you can go to quantumtheurgy.click. So it's one word, quantumtheurgy.click. And that's a good start.
All right. Again, I will have it in the show notes. Laurence also puts out some amazing content. In fact, one of the books I am looking most forward to reading this year is a book that Laurence is going to put out. I feel it's going to be another groundbreaking book on Gnosticism, because I've read his other books, and all of his books are just treasure troves of Gnosis. I mean, he writes a book about Sufism, and he goes into 20 different directions, from Crowley to ancient Greece. It's an adventure reading your work. So thanks, Laurence, for bringing these ideas to life like Joanna. So
that's very kind of you, Miguel. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And of course, always last but not least, we've got the MoonDog, Vance. Thanks for being here, Vance, and keeping everything under semi-control.
Now, there's an illusion, right? There's an illusion. Oh, it's always so much fun. I love being associated with Aeon Byte and giving you a hand, Miguel. And Joanna, always a pleasure. You're delightful. Laurence, glad to see you here. Great to be
Same
with
here,
you.
Vance.
Thank you, Vance.
All right. Good night, everyone. And we
Thank you.
shall talk to you soon. And yes, heresy shouldn't be this much fun. Hello and goodbye as always.